Where's theirs, Martin? I can't start without my Martin.
So you stand here, and then before they make the blessing, you say what page the Torah reading is on. You want to do that?
In this case, we're on page, the first one is 957.
Yeah, all you do is say it starts on page 957, chapter 33, verse 50.
Okay, so
And then
the first ones you do.
Right. And then the second, you announce page 960, verses chapter 34, verse 16.
Okay.
Okay?
Mhm.
So when the
And
Torah...
that's before the blessing.
Yeah, because you don't want to interrupt.
Yeah,
So
sure.
you try and do it before they make the bracha so that it's an uninterrupted from that they're called until the bracha.
Okay.
All right?
Mhm. I don't see Kana yet. Does she come in late?
All right, let me get
Hopefully soon again.
I hope so.
Does this work? Oh,
She
it
likes
does
you a
work.
lot.
Dum, 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 dee, 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 dee.
So now that they have the three parts,
What?
now that they have it, that we can sign up for three, there's three parts.
Oh, yeah,
instead
yeah.
of two.
Is that what we're doing
Yeah,
now?
last week, Simon, he didn't come up and I had a motion. It was kind of awkward, but then he realized he was supposed to come up.
Oh, he didn't come up right away.
Yeah, but that's because it's different.
Yeah.
But today I
So we have two parts today, don't we?
That's because I signed up for both.
Oh, okay.
Nobody took one of them.
And I got you. Is this thing working? I guess, okay, this is much better. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Stan, good to see you. Martin, Len, God be with you.
Becky and Jeff.
Becky, Jeff, good to see you guys. Joan just walked in. Shabbat Shalom. How we doing? Okay, we'll start in 1 minute. How are you? Hi, Elliot. Your piece of art, the parking lot looks Beautiful. It's like Da Vinci. How are you? Thank you so much. Are the babies okay? Doing well? Good. All right. Major celebration if they come. What? Now. Is this working okay? Can you hear it? I don't hear much.
Put it up a little higher.
Yeah, probably. It's not. Oh, me? Put it higher. Hello? Does that work? Hello? Can you hear me? You can't hear well? Dana's shaking her head.
What's the, not, let me see.
I don't know. What's the volume here?
On the back. Wireless one, okay.
Oh, it's real low?
It's okay. I was just gonna. I think you did turn this on, right?
It's too low. All right, let's begin, and we'll get that figured out. Don Friedman's here now. We can begin Shabbos. We are on page Lishmat Kol Chai. We're on page 147. Mea Arba'im V'Sheva. You ready?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Shochenad marom v'kadosh shemo.
Shochenad marom v'kadosh shemo. B'fi yishanim titalo v'bnei tzadikim titbara.
V'chatuv rananu tzadikim badonai. Lai sharim navati hila. B'fi yisharim titalo. Uvdivrei tzadikim titbarach. Uvelshon chasidim titromam uvekerev kedoshim titkadash uvmakalot revivot amcha beit Yisrael.
B'rinit parishim kamalkeinu b'chol dor v'dor Imoteinu.
Lehodot, lehaleo, leshabeach, lefaer, leromem, lehader, levarech, lealei, ukales, akol tivrei, shirot v'tishbachot, David ben Yishai, avdecha meshichecha. Yishtabach Shimcha Le'ad Malkeinu.
El Melech HaGadol v'Shamayim u'Baaretz. Shirush v'chalav zimra.
Berachot v'hodaot me'ata v'yad olam. Baruch atah Adonai El Melech Gadol b'tishbachot. El haodaot Adon haniflaot habocher b'shirei zimra Melech El chei haolamim.
Please rise, Hatzi Kaddish.
Yitgadal v'yikadash Shemei Rabbah Be'ama divra kirutei V'yamlich malchutei B'chayechon uvyomechon Uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael Ba'gala uvizman koriv V'imaru amen Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach Le'olam o'amei amaya Yitbarach Yitbarach v'yitztabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnasei v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudasha brechu le'ela mimkal berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata Da'amiran be'ama v'imaru amen. Baruch et Adonai ha'mevorach. Baruch Adonai ha'mevorach
לעולם ועד.
Be seated. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or uvarei choshech, oseh shalom uvarei et hakol. Hakol yoducha v'hakol yeshabachucha.
Yotzer hakol ha'el boter b'kol yom dato sharei mizrach. Meir la'aretz v'le'merad ha'barachamim. Elohim barachamech v'barachamim Eloheinu l'adam l'seinu tu miskabeinu migomisheinu miskabadeinu.
Efes biltecha gol aleinu limot hamashiach, ve'ein domeh lecha Moshienu litchiat hametim. El Adon kol hamasim baruch umvorach befika neshama godlo v'tuvo male olam da'ad udvuna sovevim oto hamit gael hayot hakodesh v'neder bechavod al hamekava Zechutu mishor lifnei chiso chesed v'rachamim lifnei chavodo tovim me'arot shebara Eloheinu yitzaram b'da'at b'vina uv'haskel koach ugvura natam bahem liot moshlim b'kerev tevel Maleim ziv ufikim noga na'ezivam b'cholam smechim b'tzeitam v'sasim b'voam osim b'yem ha'retzon konam pe'er v'chavod notnim lishmo tzaholav arina lezecher malchuto kara leshemesh vayizrach orah v'hitkin surat havana shevach notnim lo kol tzeva marom Tif ered ugedula serafim v'yofanim v'chayot hakodesh yadai dai 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 yadai dai 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 yadai dai 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 yadai dai yadai dai 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 yadai dai 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 yadai dai 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 dai.
152.
El asher shavat mikol ha'ma'asim.
Yom HaShvi mishabech v'yom ha'mizmor shel yom ha'Shabbat. Tov le'Adonai.
Titbarach Moshienu ashavech ma'aseh yadecha v'al me'orei or she'asita yafa'aru chasela.
153.
Titbarach tzureinu malkeinu v'go aleinu b'rei kedoshim. Titbarach tzureinu malkeinu v'go aleinu b'rei kedoshim. V'chulam potrim epihem b'kedusha uv'tohara b'shira uv'zimra umvarachim umshabachim umfa'arim uma'aritzim umakdishim umamlichim et shem ha'el. L'hakdish leotzram b'nachat ruach b'safa v'ra v'nima kadosha kulam ke'echad onim v'yomrim b'yira kadosh 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 Adonai tzavahot maloch ha'aretz kevodo V'ha'ofanim v'chayot ha'kodesh Bara'ash gadol mitnasim liyomat serafim liyomatam meshabachim v'yomrim Baruch kevod Adonai mimakomo Le'el Baruch Nimo Titenu, Lamelech El Chai V'Kayam, Zmirot Yomeru V'Tishbechot Yashmiu, Kihu Levado Poel Gevurot, Oseh Hadashot Baal Milchamot, Zarei Tzedakot, Matzmiach Yeshuot, Borei Refurot, Nora Tehilot, Adon Haniflaot, Hamchadesh Betuvo B'chayom Tamid, Maaseh V'Reishit Kamur, Liosei Orim Gedolim, Ki Liolam Chasdo. Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, V'nis Kechulanu Mehera Lioro, Baruch Atah Adonai, Yotzer HaMeorot. Ahava Rabav Tanu, Adonai Eloheinu, Chemla Gedola V'Teira, Chamalta Aleinu, Avinu Malkeinu, Ba'avor Avoteinu, Shabbatchu V'cha, Avinu Malkeinu, Vatlamdechu Kechayim, Kein Dechonenu Lamdeinu, Avinu Ha'av Harachaman, Hamrachem Rachem Aleinu, V'tein V'libeinu Lahavinu Haskil Lishmoa, Lilamod Ulamei, Lishmor V'lasot, Ulekayem et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha b'ahava, V'ha'ernenu b'toratecha, V'dabek libeinu b'mitzvotecha, V'yachei levavenu li'ahava u'li'ara eshemecha, V'lo nevosh Le'olam va'ed, V'lo nevosh Le'olam va'ed, Ki v'shem kodshecha Hagadol v'hanora batachnu, Nagila v'nismecha, Nagila v'nismecha b'shuatecha. V'havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot haaretz, V'tolichenu komemiyut le'artzenu, Ki el poel Yeshuot ata, Uvanu v'charta mikolam v'lashon, V'keiravtanu l'shimcha hagadol, Selah be'emet, Lehodot lecha, Uyachetcha b'yahava. Baruch atah Adonai, Habocher b'yamo Yisrael b'yahava.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. V'yahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha, u'v'chol me'odecha, v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele, asher anochi mitzavecha, hayom al levavecha, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשפך ובקומך וקשתם להיות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. Page 156 והים שמות תשמע מצוותיי ונתתי מצרצכם ביתו ישמרו לכם וכתבתם על זבותיכם וישולח למען יבוא ימיכם ודבריכם בשבותיכם לתת להם כמהשמיים על הארץ. ויאמר אדוני משה לאמור דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת להם ויעשו להם ציצית על כנפי ידיהם לדורותם ונתנו על ציצית הכנף תחילת והיה לכם לציצית וריתם אותו וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם אשר אתם שונאים אחריהם למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
Adonai Elohechem emet.
ויציב נכון וקיים מקובל וטוב ויפה
לדור ודור הוא קיים ושמו קיים וכיסו נכון ומלכותו ואמונתו ליד קיימת.
ודבריו חיים קיימים. Page 157.
אמת שאתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו מלכנו מלך אבותינו גואלנו גואל אבותינו יוצרנו צור ישועתנו פודנו ומצילנו מעולם שמך אין אלוהים זולתך עזרת אבותינו אתה הוא מעולם. Ram v'nisa gadol v'nora mashpil ge'im magbi hashifolim motzi asirim ofod anavim v'ozer dalim v'onel yamo v'yetchavam elav tehilon li'el elyon baruch hu amavarach Moshe Miriam uvnei Yisrael lechavanu shira besimcha rabba v'yamaru chulam o mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha Nedar Bakodesh, Nora Tehilot, Sefel, Shira Chadasha, Shibchu Geulim, Leshimcha Wasafat Hayam, Yachad Kulam Hodu Vihim Lichu, Ve'amaru Adonai Imloch Le'alam Vahed, Yandai da dai 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 dai, Yai dai 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 dai, Tzur Yisrael, Kuma v'Yezrat Yisrael, Uftech Enemecha Yehuda v'Yisrael, Go Aleinu Adonai Tzvaot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai Gal Yisrael.
Together we begin the Amidah for Shacharit Shabbat, page 159, through the Kedusha, and then in silence the remainder of the Amidah through page 166. Let's begin.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei HaKol, V'Zocher Chasdei Avot, Umevi Goel Limnei V'Nehem, Leman Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer Ufoked Umoshia Umagen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, Ufoked Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'alam Adonai, Mechayei Metim Atav Rav Lehoshia, Morid Hatal, Mechalkel Chayim Bechesed, Mechayei Metim Barachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim V'Rofei Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umakayim Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Ba'al Gevurot, Umidom Melach, Melech Meimid, Umachayeh, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'emanata lahachayot meitim, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayei hameitim.
L'shem shemati shomoto b'shmei marom, kakatu v'yad nevi'ech, avakarazel zav'yamar.
Nekadesh et shimcha ba'olam, Kashem Shemakdishim Bishmei Marom, Kakatu v'yad nevi'echa, V'karazel zevi'amar, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzebaot, Melocho ha'aretz kevodo.
Azv'gol Rosh Gadol Adir V'Gad Mashmim Kol Mitnasim L'Matzarafim L'Matamruk Yomeru.
Az beko Rash Gadol Adir V'Chazak Mashmim Kol, Az beko Rash Gadol Adir V'Chazak Mashmim Kol, Mitnasim Liumatzarafim, Mitnasim Liumatzarafim, Liumatam Baruch Yomeru, Baruch Kevod Adonai Mimakomo.
Mimkom Chamakenu Tofiyah Tzidkadal V'Tzidkadash B'tot Yerushalayim Yerucha
ממקומך מלכנו תופיע, ממקומך מלכנו תופיע, ותמלוך עלינו, ותמלוך עלינו, כי מחכים אנחנו לך. מתי תמלוך בציון, בקרא בימינו לעולם ועד תשכון. תתגדל ותתקדש בתוך ירושלים עירך, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, ולנצח נצחים. ועינינו תראנה, תראנה מלכותך, כדבר האמור בשירי עוזך. על ידי דוד משך צדקך, ימלוך אדוני לעולם, אלוהי ציון לדור ודור, הללויה. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד קולך. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד קולך. ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, קדושתך נקדיש. ושפחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש, לעולם לעולם ועד. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד קולך. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד קולך. כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה, וקדוש אתה. כי אל מלך גדול וקדוש אתה, גדול וקדוש אתה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש. Oh, say shalom, oh, shalom bimromav hu yaseh shalom. Oh, say shalom, shalom bimromav. Hu yaseh shalom. Hu yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'imaru amen. Ve'imaru amen.
A nice warm-up. It feels good to be together. And I cannot thank you enough for all the notes. I have piles to get through in the next couple of weeks. All the thank yous for all the wonderful greetings from everybody here. So you'll get your note. It's just I have to plow through all the beauty that's been part of my life, even in sadness. So I thank you. Let's continue. Page 168 with the Seder Hotzat Torah.
Yitgarav v'yikadash mei Rabbah, be'amad yivra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, b'agalav v'zman kariv v'yimaru, amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevorach, le'olam amei hamaya yitbarach. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalau shemei dekudesh abrichu le'elamim kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran b'yama v'imaru amen. Titgabau tzalot tahon u'utahon d'chol Yisrael kodam u'vuhon d'vishmaya v'imaru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imaru amen. O say shalom bimramav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Torah service, page 168.
Ein kamocha v'Elohim Adonai v'ein kamasecha malchutecha malachut kol olamim u'memshaltecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch li'olam va'ed. Adonai oz li'amo yitein, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. Av harachamim heitiv avertzonecha et Zion. Tifnech amot Yerushalayim. Tifnech amot Yerushalayim. Ki v'cha levad batachnu melech el ram v'nisa adon olamim.
Please rise.
Vayehi ben Soah ha'aron vayomer Moshe Kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha ki mitzion tetzei Torah ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah Udevar Adonai Mirushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Li'amo Yisrael B'Kedushato.
I believe because Judaism respects the mind, purifies the heart, exalts the spirit, sanctifies all of life. I believe because Judaism invites me to engage to an unending quest for truth, righteousness, justice. I also believe because when I strive for these, I sense that I am experiencing the most human part of me. I believe because Judaism opens the door that leads me into a sense of companionship with all humanity. I believe because while sharing the inheritance of eons which made me a human being, I am also heir to a Jewish inheritance of millennia, which crowns me like the crowns of the Torah, me descendant of prophets, which we're going to be sharing today, and sages, and I claim both legacies. I believe because having entered the world as a Jew by birth or by choice, I wish to leave it a Jew as a Jew by worth. Amen.
Be'ana rachetz v'lishmei kadisha kadisha yakira ana emar tushbechan Be'ana rachetz Be'ana rachetz v'lishmei kadisha kadisha yakira ana emar tushbechan yehi rava kodamach detiftach libi be'oraita v'tashli mishalim delibi v'liba dechol amach Yisrael l'tav l'chayin v'lishlam. Amen. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo.
Gadlu l'Adonai iti unromema Shemo yachdav lecha Adonai hagedula v'hagevura v'hatiferet v'hanetzach v'hahod ki cho b'shamayim uva'aretz ki cho b'shamayim uva'aretz lecha Adonai hamamlacha v'hamid na'aseh l'chol rosh romemu romemu Adonai Eloheinu V'hishtachkavu lahadom raglav kadoshu romemu Adonai Eloheinu Eloheinu v'hishtachkavu lahar kodsho ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachkavu lahar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachkavu lahar kodsho ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 tziva lanu Moshe.
You do it better than I can. Excellent. Please be seated, everyone. We are reading the last portions of the book of Numbers. Let's get together for our study, our reading, celebrating. We have a couple of very nice anniversary here. The last two chapters of the book of Numbers are extremely interesting. We are going to actually be focusing on the prophetic message this Shabbat of Jeremiah, and we're going to be talking about the prophets. Who are these prophets that we read about every week? The Haftarot are only from the prophetic literature. So we're going to be sharing what was their mission, how were they unique, and what should we know about them. But the Torah reading begins on page 957. And it begins here with a very disturbing verse that has been written about for centuries. Clean up the Moabites. Kill them all. That's pretty tough to read because you know our tradition doesn't believe in mass killing or genocide. And that's the beauty. If someone were to come up to you and say, look what's in the Torah. How can you believe in this nonsense Torah, this religion of yours, this violent? And your answer is, I am a Jew from a rabbinic tradition. I am a Jew in which our tradition was passed down through the generations, from the beginnings of the Torah, from these texts written over 3,000 years ago, to the transmission through the prophets, and then the rabbis. And the rabbis didn't like these verses. We're not biblical fundamentalists. And this is very important distinction here. We are rabbinic Jews. Our Judaism is rabbinic Judaism. So those of you who took my class, you know what the rabbis did. And we're going to continue that journey because it's an ongoing one. And that is very important because there are other religious traditions that have very difficult verses to read. And they don't have the same transmission that we have. It's very interesting. So I want you to note that in the commentary on the opening verses. This also speaks of one of the 4 references in the Torah to the ideal boundaries of the land of Israel. And I remember once I had a professor in my, for a social event who was not Jewish, in fact Muslim, cardiac surgeon, and then his wife was a professor, colleague of mine, pointed to these verses saying, you Jews want the land to India. Every Jew wants the ideal boundaries of the land of Israel. And I had to explain to him that there are many different geographical designations in the Torah, and certainly we have a long legacy of commentary on that. That's not part of the ambition of the state of Israel. And then there's reference to the early prison system, the Arei Miklat, the cities of refuge, which we're going to read about, those who are involved in capital crime. And it delineates all the various charges of homicide and accidental homicide. So that's very interesting as well. Then it speaks of capital punishment with the differing homicides spelled out here. It's a very interesting, again, that's another rabbinic issue. The Torah has multiple references to capital punishment, and the rabbis basically eliminated it. So there you go. There's a difference between biblical fundamentalism and our rabbinic tradition. So that's important to keep in mind. The blood avengers, the Arei Miklat, and then we have the conclusion of the daughters of Tzalafchad, who protested that they were not part of the heirs of the land of Israel. And our dear women who stood up for their rights, this heritage dates back to these opening chapters in the incident of the daughters Benot Tzalafchad. So the text is all over the place. Let's begin. Page 957.
V'yazor v'yagem v'yashelach halachosim ba v'namar amen. Hakol havagodol Eloheinu tnu kavod laTorah Yamod. Meir Tevya ben Sholom Chayesara La Leata Kohen Baruch Shenatan Torah Le'amo Yisrael B'Kedushato V'atem Avekim Adonai Elohechem Chayim Kolchem Hayom.
We're on Numbers 3350, and reading will be Don Friedman.
Baruch Hu es Adonai Yam Baruch. Baruch Adonai Yam Baruch Le'olam V'oed. Baruch Atah Adonai Le'melech Haolam. Asher Baruch Rabbanan Mikol U'amim. Nosan Lenu es Torah So. Baruch Atah Adonai Nosein Hatzolo.
Amen.
Amen.
Vaydaber Adonai al Moshe b'Arvos Moab Hayarden Yerecho Lemor Daber al Bnei Yisrael v'amarta alehem ki atem ovrim es Hayarden el Eretz Canaan v'horashtem es kol yeshvei ha'aretz mipnechem v'ibadtem eis kol maskiosam Ve'eis kol tzalmei masechosam tabidu, ve'eis kol bamasam tashmidu. V'harashtem es ha'aretz v'shavtem ba, ki lachem. Nasati es ha'aretz l'reshes hosa, v'hisnachaltem es ha'aretz v'goro, l'mishpachosechem, l'arav. Tarbu es nacholaso, v'lam at tam'it es nacholaso, el asher yetze lo shama hagoro lo yiyeh, l'matos avosechem tisnechalu, v'im lo sorishu es yoshvei haaretz mipnechem, v'haya Asher tosiru mehem l'sikim be'einechem v'litzninim b'tzidechem v'tzararu eschem al haaretz asher atem yoshvim ba v'haya kasher dimisi lasos lahem e'eseh lachem Vaydaber Adonai al Moshe Lemor Tzav es b'nei Yisrael v'amarta alehem Ki atem ba'im el ha'aretz Canaan Zos ha'aretz Asher tipol lachem b'nachala Eretz Canaan ligvulaseha V'haya lachem b'as negev Mimidbar Sinai Yedei Edom V'haya lachem gavul negev Miktzei Yom HaMelach Kedma V'nasav lachem הגבול מנגב למעלה עקרבים ועבר צינה, והיו תוצאותיו מנגב לקדש ברנע, ויצא חצר הדור ועבר עצמונה. ונעשיו הגבול מעצמון נחלה מצרים, והיו תוצאותיו הימה וגבול ים, והיה לכם הים הגדול וגבול, זה יהיה לכם גבול ים, וזה יהיה לכם גבול צפון, מן הים הגדול תישאו לכם הור ההר, מהור ההר תישאו לבוא חמאס, והיו תוצאות הגבול צדדה. ויצא הגבול זפרונה, והיו תוצאותיו חצר עינן, זה יהיה לכם גבול צפון, והביאם לכם לגבול קדמה, מחצר עינן שפמה. וירד הגבול משפם, הריבלה מקדם לעין, וירד הגבול ומחה על כסף ים כנרת קדמה. וירד הגבול הירדנה, והיו תוצאותיו ים המלח, זאת תהיה לכם הארץ לגבולותיה סביב. ויצב משה בני ישראל לאמור, זאת הארץ אשר תשנחלו עושה בגורל, אשר ציווה אדוני לעשות לששת המטות וחצי המטה. כי לקחו מטה בני הראובני לבית אבוסם, ומטה בני הגדי לבית אבוסם, וחצי מטה מנשה לקחו נחלתם. שני המטות וחצי המטה לקחו נחלתם מעבר לירדן יריחו קדמה מזרח.
ברוך אתה אדוני מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת לחי עולם נוטה בסוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
I'm sure you recognize a lot of the geographical locations mentioned there. If you're interested, in the back of our Chumash, Roman numeral 5 is the map of the settlements of the tribes in Eretz Yisrael. It's a very good map, as our Chumash has.
Yeah.
Let's continue.
Yamdu
Mordechai ben Yisachar v'Golda.
Mordechai ben Yisachar v'Golda
Esther bat Yochanan v'Hendel.
Esther
Esther
Asya
bat
bat
Yochanan v'Hendel.
Aliyah Hashenis.
We're on page 960, Numbers 34:16, and reading will be John Broad.
Baruchu et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Varach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור, אלה שמות האנשים אשר ינחלו לכם את הארץ, אלעזר הכהן ויהושע בן נון, ונשיא אחד ממטה תיקחו לנחול את הארץ, ואלה שמות האנשים למטה יהודה, כלב בן יפונה, ולמטה בני שמעון, שמואל בן עמיהוד, למטה בנימין, אלידד בן כסלון, ולמטה בני דן, נעשי, בוקי בן יוגלי, לבני יוסף, למטה בני מנשה, נעשי, חניאל בן אפוד, ולמטה בני אפרים, נעשי, כמואל בן שבטן, ולמטה בני זבולון, נעשי, אליצפן בן פרנח, ומטה בני יששכר, נעשי, פלטיאל בן עזן, ולמטה בני אשר, נעשי, אחיהוד בן שלומי, ולמטה בני נפתלי, נעשי, פדאל בן עמיהוד, אלה אשר ציווה אדוני, לנחל את בני ישראל בארץ כנען.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נתן בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Chaim David, you
Climb the ladder.
Aharam Bluma Gittel Aliyah Hashlishi.
Glad I know you.
Mm-hmm. We're on page 961, Numbers 35.
Chapter 35.
I'm sorry, chapter 35, and reading again will be John Broad.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamvarach. Baruch Adonai hamvarach li'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Asher bocha banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe b'arvot Moav ar Yarden Yerecho lemor tzav et bnei Yisrael v'natnu lavim minachalat Achuzatam arim lashavet umigrash larim sevivotem titnu lalvim v'hayu harim lahem lashavet umigrashem Yelivhem tam v'lichu sham v'lcho chayatam u'migrashei harim asher titnu lavim mikir ha'ir v'chutza elef amas avir u'madotem Mechutz la'ir et pa'at kedma alpaim bama ve'et pa'at negev alpaim bama ve'et pa'at yam ale alpaim bama ve'et pa'at tzafon alpaim bama v'ha'ir batavet Za Yelahem Migrasharim Ve'et Harim Asher Titnu Lalvim Et Shesh Are Hamiklat Asher Titnu Lanu Shama Harotzeach Valehem Titnu Arbaim Ushtayim Ir Kol Harim Asher Titnu Lalvim Arbaim Ushmona Ir Et Han Ve'et Migrashehan Ve'harim Asher Titnu Me'achuzat B'nei Yisrael Med Harav Yinchalu Yinchat
No, you skip the line. Tarbu.
Tar Med Harav Tarvu Ume'et Hama'at Hama'ito Ish Kefi Nechalato Asher Nachalato Yiten Marav Lavim
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam Asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yasher Koach, David Chaffetz, here at the Torah in memory of his dear father, Harry Chaffetz, a blessed memory. Yasher Koach.
Yamod Yisrael Tzvi ben Aaron Ana Laliyah Harbi.
Continue with.
We're on page 962, Numbers chapter 35, and reading will be Stan Mitchell.
No prison system, there were cities of refuge. Arei Miklat.
Baruch hu et Adonai hamavorach. Baruch Adonai hamavorach li'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Asher b'chabonu mikol ha'amim. V'notan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael v'yamarta alehem, ki atem ovrim et hayarden artza Kna'an, v'hikritem lachem arim arei miklat tiyena lachem, v'nasham arotzeach makei nefesh b'shkaga, v'hayu lachem ha'arim lemiklat migoel, V'yamot harotzeach aramdo lifnei haida l'mishpat v'harim asher titenu sheish arei mikla sheisharat tihyana lachem et shlosh harim titnu me'ever le'yarden v'et shlosh harim titnu be'eretz Kan Arei miklat tihyena livnei Yisrael v'lagir v'latoshav b'tocham tihyena sheish harim ha'elef lamiklat lanu shama kom makei nefesh bishkaga.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Asher natan lanu Torah emet. L'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. And Irving Perlmutter here is at the Torah in memory of his dear brother Ralph Perlmutter, Zichrono Livracha.
Yamdu Yosef and Moshe Malka Bracha, Fega Bas Abraham, Slova Leva Aliyah, Hamishi.
73.
We're on page 963, Numbers 35. Verse 16.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam. Asher b'chabanu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Bichli barzel hika'u v'yamot. Rotzeach hu mot yumat rotzeach. V'im ba'even yad asher yamut ba. Hika'u v'yamot rotzeach. Hu mot yumat rotzeach. O bichli hi eitz yad. Asher emut bo hika'u. V'yamot rotzeach hu mot yumat rotzeach. Goel hadam hu. Yamit et rotzea befik obo, uyemitenu, vim besina yedofenu, o hishlich alav, bitzidia, vayamot, o be'eva hikahu biado, vayamot mot yumat, hamekerotzeachu, goel hadam yamit et rotzeach, befik obo, V'im befeta below eva hadafo, o hishlich alav kokali below tzidaya, o bechol tzidaya was it? Tzidaya bechol even asher yamut ba below raot, v'yapel alav yamot, v'lo oyev lo, v'lo mevakesh ra'ato. V'shavtu ha'eda ben ha'makeh u'ben goel hadam al ha'mishpatim ha'ele v'yitzilo lu ha'eda et rotzea miyad goel hadam v'yeshivu oto ha'eda el ir miklato asher nasam shama v'yashav ba ad mot ha'kohen ha'gadol Asher mashachoto b'shemen hakodesh v'imatzo yatsa rotzeach et gevul ir miklato asher yanu shama umatza oto goel hadam michutz legvul ir miklato v'rotzea ratzach goel hadam et rotzeach ein lo tam ki be'ir miklato yeshev ad mot hakohen hagadol V'acharei mot hakohen hagadol yashuv harotzeach el eretz achuzato v'hayu ele lachem lechukat mishpat ledorotechem b'chol moshvotechem.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher natan lanu Torah emes v'chayei olam natan b'tocheinu. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. A tough section there. We're going to recite a Misha Barak now for a couple that everybody loves. Joel and Felicia. Their daughter Melissa here with the grandchildren. We're all celebrating this. Why don't we all please rise? This is a beautiful celebration. All the children. Misha Barak Avotenu. Avraham Yisav Yaakov, Sardiv Korach Leah. Uyavrech et Yosef ben Moshe umalka brocha v'fega bat Avraham v'sluva liba. Hope I had the names right. Bavur shebahem ladod Hashem kodsho. Al kol hachesed asher malahem miyom chatunatam yom simchat libam yom hazeh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishmarem v'yasilem mikol sarav v'sukamim l'geneg machla. V'yizku l'rotz etza'eim l'oskim b'tzorah, u'v'mitzvot v'tzorchei tzibur, u'v'yan eretz Yisrael b'emunah v'yishla bracha v'tzcha b'chol maseh yedehem, im kol Yisrael acheihem v'lomar, Amen. May God, who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, bless Joel and Felicia, servants who have come to the Torah today. They have to honor God, to honor the Torah, to honor the Shabbat. and to honor our congregation as we honor them, as they express their gratitude at this very sacred moment for all the blessings that God has afforded them in their 48 years of love together.
I was a child bride.
You were a child bride. Well, yeah. Wait a minute, you're only 53. How did you do that? That's very young. May the Kadosh Baruch Hu protect and deliver our dear friends. No more tsuras, no more hospitals, please. May they continue to enjoy God's blessings in the new song of their years to come. Embraced today and always by the love of their children and their grandchildren, so that they may always live as they do with us, in joy and gladness, in peace and friendship and companionship forever. And let us say, Amen.
Simen tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, simen tov, simen tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, simen tov, simen tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, simen tov,
Where the heck is it? This is it.
Mazel tov, mazel tov. Please be seated, everyone.
Okay, here's where we're reading. Talmud Malka Esther by Yosef Fegalia Hashishis.
Baruch Hu Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Eloheinu
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Kol makei nefesh lefi eidim ירצח את הרוצח, ואין אחד לא יענה ונפש למות. ולא תיקחו כופר לנפש רוצח, אשר הוא רשע למות, כי מות יומת. ולא תיקחו כופר לנוס אלי מקלטו, לשוב לשבת בארץ, עד מות הכהן, ותחניפו את הארץ, אשר אתם בה, כי אדם הוא יחניף את הארץ, ולארץ לא יכופל אדם אשר שופח בה, כי אם בדם שופכו, ולא תטמא את הארץ, אשר אתם יושבים בה, אשר אני שוכן בתוכה, כי אני אדוני שוכן בתוך בני ישראל.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam natan b'tochenu. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
And Melissa here to honor her parents and grandchildren.
We're on page 965, Numbers chapter 36, verse 1.
Degrees of murder. Last verses.
Baruch Hu Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai
Baruch Adonai Baruch Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
ויקראו ראשי אבות למשפחת בני גלעד בן מכיר בני מנשה ממשפחות בני יוסף וידברו לפני משה ולפני הנשיאים וראשי אבות לפני ישראל ויאמרו אדוני ציווה אדוני לתת את הארץ בנחלה בגורל לבני ישראל ואדוני צווה אדוני לתת את נחלת צלבחת אחינו לבנותיו והיו לאחד בפני שבטי בני ישראל לאנשים ונגרעה נחלתן מנחלת אבותינו ונוסף על נחלת המטה אשר תהיינה להם ומגורל נחלתנו יגרע ואם יהיה היובל לפני ישראל ונוסף נחלתן על נחלת המטה אשר תהיינה להם ומנחלת מטה אבותינו יגרע נחלתן ויצב משה את בני ישראל על פי אדוני לאמור כן מטה בני יוסף דוברים זה הדבר אשר ציווה אדוני לפנות צלבחת לאמור לטוב בעיניהם תהיינה לנשים אך למשפחת מטה אביהם תהיינה לנשים ולא תיסוב נחלת לבני ישראל ממטה אל מטה כי איש בנחלת מטה אבותיו ידבקו בני ישראל וכל בת ירש את נחלה ממטות בני ישראל לאחד ממשפחת מטה אביה תהיינה לאישה למען ירשו בני ישראל איש נחלת אבותיו ולא תיסב נחלה ממטה למטה אחר כי איש נחלתו ידבקו מטות בני ישראל כאשר ציווה אדוני את משה כן עשו בנות צלבחת ותהיינו מחלה תרצה וחגלה ומלכה ונאה בנות צלבחת לבני דודיהן לשנים ממשפחות בני מנשה בן יוסף יהיו לנשים ותהי נחלתן על מטות משפחות אביהן אלה המצוות והמשפטים אשר ציווה אדוני ביד משה אל בני ישראל בערבות מואב על ירדן יריחו
חזק חזק ונתחזק
חזק חזק ונתחזק
ברוך אתה אדוני Eloheinu melech haolam, asher notan lanu Torah emes, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu, baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Amen. Please remain standing for Amisha Berach. For those who are ill. Misha Berach, Avodim Avraham Yaakov, Yimotenu Sardi v'karov Aliyah. V'yivarech et kol ha'cholim, Tevye Gershon ben Aharon Aviv Rivka, Tzvi Yitzchak ben Shima v'chaya. David Yosef ben Chanabasha, Yitzchak ben Shulamit, Rivka Shifra bat Sarah Rezel, Leah bat Sarah, Mary Barton, Yudit bat Rachel, Zachary Zimmerman, Shaul Beryl ben Velvel, Miriam bat Nacha, Matis Chayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yemalei Rachamim Lehem Lachlikan Rabotam, V'yishlach Lehem Hira Refuah Shlema, Mina Shamayim, Rufat Nefesh, ורפואת הגופתו שאר חוכלים וחזק ידידי העוסקים בצורכיהם שבת היא מזו קרובו לבוא Ashta b'zman kariv and omar. Amen. Amen. May God, who bless our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and bring blessing and healing to all of our loved ones we have uttered in our prayers this morning. If they're not on the list, please remember them and utter them when we recite our Mishaberach. May the Holy One mercifully restore them to health and vigor, granting them spiritual and physical well-being together with all others who are ill. May God grant strength to the doctors and nurses who tend to them. And those Shabbats of time we refrain from crying out. Yet we hope and pray that Refuah Shlah, healing, is at hand. As we say, Amen. Avotenu mikor habirah imotenu. May the source of strength bless the ones before us. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach imotenu mikor habirah lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Hatzi Kaddish.
Yiskadal v'yiskadash Shemei Rabbah Yamad Divrach Yerusei V'yamlich Malchusei V'chayechonu V'yamechon Uv'chayedecho Beis Yisrael V'hagala Uv'izman Karib Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam Ome'omayah Yisbarach Yisbarach V'yishtabach V'yispar V'yisramam V'yisnaseh V'yishadar V'yisaleh V'yishalal Shmei Dekudisha Rechu Leila min kol birchasa v'shirasa Tushbechasa v'nechemasa Tamiran be'olma V'imra Amen.
Seated.
I think he's stuck. You were the last one, right?
Ya'amod Daniel Yitzchak Ben Yehuda Leib Laliat Maftir.
We're on page 967, Numbers 36:10.
Baruch Hu es Adonai Hambarach. Baruch Adonai Hambarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'nasan lanu es taraso. Baruch atah Adonai nosein ha'torah.
Amen. Kasher tzivah Adonai et Moshe keinosu benot zel Chad v'tiena machala tirtza v'chagla umilka v'na benot zel Chad livnei dorehen lanashim mimishpachot b'nei Menashe ben Yosef yiyu lanashim v'adhinaklatan omatei mishpachot avihem Elah mitzvot v'mishpatim asher tzivah Adonai b'yad Moshe el b'nei Yisrael v'arvot Moab all Yerden Yerecha.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher nasan lanu Torah emes v'chaye olam nata b'sochenu baruch atah Adonai nosein haTorah.
Amen. Yamdu amagbi avagolel.
V'zos
HaTorah asher Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael Yad Moshe V'zot HaTorah asher Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael Al pi Adonai B'yad Moshe V'zot HaTorah asher Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael Al pi Adonai B'yad Moshe.
Please be seated as we now hear the words of the prophet Jeremiah, the second haftarah of the three haftarot before Tisha B'Av. And we're going to explore a little bit more about who these guys, Jeremiah, next week Isaiah 1, who they are, who are the prophets, what were they trying to do, and why is the prophetic message so important, especially at a time of tragedy that we prepare for in our national fast of Tisha B'Av. We're going to pick up the text on page 975, the 20th verse on page 975. Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher bachar b'nbiim tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hane'emarim be'emes Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah uv Moshe avdo uv Yisrael amo uv inviei ha'emes v'tzedek ki me'olam shavarti ulech v'nitakti mosrosayich Vatomri lo evor ki al kol giv'ah gavoha v'sachas kol eitz ra'anan at so'azona ve'anochi netatich sorek Kulo zera emes ve'ech nepacht li sureh hagefen nochriya ki im techabsi baneser v'sar bilach baris nichtam avonech lefanai Ne'um Adonai Elohim Ech Tomri Lo Nitmesi Acharei Hab'olim Lo Halachti Re'i Darkech Bagai De'i Me'asis Bichra kala misareches deracheha Pere limud midbar Be'avas nafsha shafa ruach ta'anasa mi yeshivena Kom evaksheha lo yi'afu B'chodsha yimtza'unha Min iraglech miyachev Ugranech mitzim'ah V'vatomri no'ash lo ki ahavti zorim va'acharehem elech. Kevoshes ganav ki yimatzeh Kain hovishu beis Yisrael Hema malchehem sorehem v'chohanehem unviehem Omrim laet avi ata V'la even at yilidtanu Kifanu elai oref v'lo fanim Uve'ez ra'asam yomru kuma v'hoshienu Ve'ayeh Elohecha asher asi salach Yakumu Im yoshiucha be'es ra'asecha Ki mispar arecha Ayu Elohecha Yehuda Allah me'ata karas li avi Aluf ne'orai ata Im tashuv Yisrael Ne'um Adonai Elai tashuv Ve'im tasir shikutzecha Mipanai v'lo sanud V'nishbata chai Adonai Be'emes b'mishpat u'v'tzedakah V'his barchuva goyim uva yishalalu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol ha'olamim tzadik b'chol hadoros Oyel ha'ne'eman ha'omer v'yoseh Hamdaber umkayim shekol devarav emes v'tzedek Ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'ne'emanim devarecha v'davar echad midvarecha achor lo yashuv rekam ki el melech ne'eman v'rachaman ata Baruch atah Adonai Oel ha'ne'eman b'chol devarav Rachem al Zion ki hives chayenu V'la'aluvas nefesh toshia bimheira v'yameinu Baruch atah Adonai Mesameach Zion b'vaneha Samcheinu Adonai Eloheinu b'Eliyahu hanavi avdecha Uv'malchus beis David Meshichecha Bimheira yavo v'yagel libeinu Al kis olo yeshev zar V'lo yinchalu od acherim es kavodo Ki v'shem kodshecha nishbata lo Shelo yichbe neiro le'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Magen David Al ha'Torah v'al ha'avodah v'al ha'nevi'im v'al yom ha'Shabbos hazeh shenasata lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha v'limnucha l'chavod ulsifares Al ha'kol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach umvarachim osach yisbarech shimcha b'fi chol chai Tamid le'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat
Amen. Lots of Torah reading. Beautiful Torah. Thank you so much. What an honor. Thank you, Don. Yasher koach. Please rise, everyone, as we invoke the prayers for our country and for the state of Israel. On page 177, the first paragraph. For the United States of America, our God and God of our ancestors, with mercy accept our prayer on behalf of our country and its government. Pour out your blessing upon this land, upon its inhabitants, upon its leaders, its judges, officers, and officials who faithfully devote themselves to the needs of the public. Help them understand the rules of justice you have decreed, so that peace and security, happiness and freedom will never depart from our land. Tfilat Shalom Medinat Yisrael, our prayer for the peace of the state of Israel, on page 178 at the top. In the English, Avinu Shebashamayim, stronghold and redeemer of the people Israel, bless the state of Israel, the beginning of our redemption. Shield it with your love, spread over it the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them, crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. And let us say, Amen. Please be seated, everyone. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, page 181.
Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha, O Hallelujah Selah. Ashrei Ha'am Shekach Lo, Ashrei Ha'am Shadonai Elohav, Tehillah LeDavid, Haromimcha Elohai HaMelech, Va'avarecha Shimcha Le'olam Va'ed.
B'chol Yom Avarchecha, Va'alel Shimcha Le'olam Va'ed.
Gadol Adonai Umhula Me'od, B'li Gdulato Ein Cheker. Dor ledor yeshabach ma'asecha, u'v'ratecha yagidu. Hadar kevod hodecha, v'divrei nifla'atecha asicha, ve'ezuz v'ratecha
yom meheru, u'gedulatza
asaprena. Zecher rav tuvecha yabi, uvetzitkatecha yiranenu. Anu berachum Adonai, erech apayim ukol chesed. Tov Adonai lako, v'rachamav al kol masav.
Yodura Adonai kol maasecha v'chasidecha yivachucha.
Kevod malchutcha yomeru, ugvuratecha yedaberu. Lehodia lidnei Adam gevuratav, uvod hadar malchuto. Malchutecha, malchut kol olamim, umemshaltecha bechador vador. Samech Adonai lecha hanoflim, v'sokech lecha hakafufim. Einecho elecha yisaberu, v'ata naten lahem et ochlam b'ito. Poteach et yadecha, u'masbiach lecha chai ratzon. Tzadik Adonai b'chal derachav, v'chasid b'chal ma'asav.
Baruch Adonai lechol korav,
lechol asher yikra'u v'emet. Ritzon Yereav Ya'aseh, V'yet Shavotam Yishma V'yoshiem.
Shomer Adonai et kol ohavav,
V'yet kol ha'shayim yashmid. Tehillat Adonai yeraber pi, V'varecha b'sar Shem kadsho l'olam va'ed. V'anachnu nevarech ya, me'ata v'ad olam. Hallelujah. Hallelujah et Shem Adonai, ki niskav shemo levado. Hodo al eretz v'shamayim, vayarem keren liamo. Tehillah lecho chasidav, Livnei Yisrael am kerovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Mizmor ledah Havu l'Adonai b'nei Elim, Havu l'Adonai, Kavod va'oz, ay, Havu l'Adonai, Kevod shemo, Shtachavu l'Adonai b'hadrat kodesh, Kol Adonai al hamayim, El hakavod hirim, Adonai amayim rabim, Kol Adonai bakoach, ay, Kol Adonai behadar, Kol Adonai shover arazim, Vashaber Adonai et azehavonon, Vaikarkidem kamo egel, Levanon, Vesirion, Kemo ven re'emim, ay, Kol Adonai chotzev l'havodesh, Kol Adonai yachil midbar, Yachil Adonai midbar kodesh, Kol Adonai yicholel al yalot, Vayechesof Ye'arot Uveheichalot, Kulo omer kavod, ay, Adonai lama buyashav, V'yeshev Adonai melech li'olam, Adonai oz li'amo yitain, Adonai yavarech et amo v'shalom, yai, da-dam, yai, da-dam, yai, da-dam, yai, da-dam, uvnucho yomar. Ki lekach tov natati lachem torati, al tazovu eitz chaim hi, lamachazikim ba v'tomecheha, Meushar deracheha, darchei noam, v'chol netivoteha, shalom. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh yameinu kekedem. Yam ba da 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 da, ya da da da. Yam ba da 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 da, ya da 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 da. Yam ba da 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 da, ya da 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 da. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva, Chadesh yameinu kekedem.
Our treasure, Deborah Gordon. What a pleasure. You are. Ruach. It's called spirit. Thank you, Deborah. So let's share some words here. This is kind of not really a sermon type of thing, but I feel I'm compelled to speak about what's going on here with our tradition at this particular point. We're in the middle of 3 weeks of national mourning. We people don't forget what happened in Jerusalem to our people, the exile and the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BCE, followed by, on the same day of the 9th of Av, the second temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, by Vespasian and Titus, in the year of 70 of the Common Era. And of course, Tisha B'Av was also the last day that the Jews had to leave Spain, and the greatest mass exodus of a people, percentage-wise, not in numbers, but in terms of the population ever recorded in history. So our people has been through a lot. And the point is that we don't forget what happened. We struggle with why these things, terrible things, occurred in our tradition, which, by the way, I mentioned last night, is one of the great challenges for the Western world in total, but since we're here in the United States, when we lose sight of where we've been from the past, we lose our national existence. And that's a big threat right now. I can't emphasize that enough. The toppling of the statues, the destruction of our history books, and on, is a great threat to the morale and the well-being of our society. When you forget where you came from, good and bad, then you lose sight of how to go forward with what we learned in the Midrash I shared last night in about Mas'eh. So the core to our messages is how these prophets, we read from Jeremiah, these 2 Shabbatot, and then 1st Isaiah. Next we got 1st Isaiah experienced the siege of the Assyrians against Judah, and Jeremiah experienced the siege of the Babylonians in the end of the 6th century before the Common Era. The message of the prophets, what is it? These Nevi'im, these prophets who we read every week, but highlighted really this week because the prophetic message of these 3 weeks is perhaps the most important message of this period that precedes Tisha B'Av. Now, first thing I would mention is that when we study ancient Israel, we note that every society in the ancient world, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Canaanites, you name them, Phoenicians, the Moabites, they all had prophets. They were called in Egypt Komrim. They weren't called Nevi'im. They all had prophets. All of the prophetic institutions of the ancient world, except for Israel, were linked to the royal throne. They were professional lackeys. They told their leaders what they wanted to hear usually about going into war. Dear King Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to destroy the Israelites, no problems. I see it in the stars. Oh, thank you, Joe. And of course, when that didn't happen, off with his head. That was the role of the prophets. They were, in a sense, magicians, dealing with the stars, shamans, you name the hucksterism of the ancient prophetic guilds. Very similar, by the way, to Mr. Putin. When he doesn't hear from his military leaders that they did well, and they were like prophets telling him, you're going to go into Kiev and destroy the country in 3 days. He exiled them. Off with your heads. You're gone. Stalin did that. Hitler did that. It's been the way of the world for a long time. They're called false prophets. These were not the prophets of Israel. These prophets of our people were independently, they weren't employed by anybody. They were independent. The only prophet that we know of great renown who was linked with the royal authority, the monarch of King David, was Nathan. But boy, did he give David havoc. He bawled him out when he committed his terrible, terrible sin of sending Uriah the Hittite to his death. Nathan, that would have been unheard of. Just think about that. That's in the 10th century before the Common Era. Unheard of in the ancient world. We have no comparable literature like that. All of them were independent. Their boss was God. Their boss was truth. Some of them had no power at all, like Amos. He was a shepherd from a little town called Tekoa. We're still reading his literature. They were not kings. They were not members of the royal court. They were not priests. They were not part of the religious establishment. They held no office. They were not elected by any people or anyone else. Often they were very unpopular. None more so than the one that we read this morning, Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah. He was flogged. He was arrested by the remaining monarchs, Jehoiakim, and then there was Jehoiakim. He was arrested in the last days of the monarchy. Arrested, imagine a prophet arrested by his own people who was considered to be a traitor. We're still reading his literature, what he wrote. He was put on trial, and he escaped from prison. He narrowly escaped with his life. The prophets, like Jeremiah, what they're known for, they were the first, out from our people, the first world's critics, moral critics. They challenged every platitude, every known mass standard of behavior. They were kosher animals. They went against fish, have to be kosher. They have to go against the stream. They were not mindful of what the masses thought. Which, by the way, I would say that Israel, the people of Israel, the Jewish people, have the role of the prophet today in the wider world. We have to so often go against the stream. In the United Nations, 85%, again a reminder, 85% of the resolutions from the United Nations Security Council are condemnations of Israel. Let's talk about going against the stream. Morality was supreme to the prophets. And the great Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, said of the prophets, one of my favorite quotes, when a king dies, when Putin dies, his power comes to an end. But when a prophet dies, his influence just begins. In other words, the prophets plant seeds. You imagine Jeremiah? He was in exile, disappeared into Egypt. He had no idea that we'd still be reading his literature today, his word. The goal of the prophet, by the way, this is a misunderstanding, was not to predict the future. That was not their thing. They were not pagan prophets. There was a rabbi in the Middle Ages who wrote a book, Faithful Jew, about the enormous amount, I forgot what the number, of false predictions of the prophets, in order to prove a point that that wasn't the real reason for the prophets. The prophets were not soothsayers. Judaism has no time for magic and witchcraft, political swamp figures. Judaism rejects all that. The core was human freedom. There was nothing prescripted or predicted in the prophetic message. Everything in life to the prophets depended upon the global situation of Israel and all of humanity. And the prophets that we just read, and the closing words that Don read from Jeremiah, the prophet was always ready for Israel and the world to mend its ways, but to face the dangers that were lurking and not be blinded. The prophet does not predict the future. The prophet warns about the future. There's a big difference in the two, between pagan and Israel. What are some of the other uniquenesses of the prophets, of the Nevi'im, that we should know? The prophets were the first ones who had this global sense of history. When you go to school, when our kids go to school, they learn that Thucydides and Herodotus were the first historians. They're wrong. Those historians, all they did was develop the idea of what's called sequential history. One event after another. No interpretation, no larger picture, a sequence of events. There were other ways of looking at history. The most foremost that the Torah rebels against is a cyclical view of history, that things are just spinning around, going nowhere, up and down, around in a cycle of nature. The prophets, not only were they linear historians, which means that they believed history was moving towards a great drama that had to unfold between God and the people of Israel and humanity. The idea of the prophets, and this is unique to Israel, is that there was the guideline for all of history. It was not predetermined. It depended upon faithfulness to the brit, to the covenant of the Jewish people. If the Jewish people were good and faithful, then the people would flourish. The same for all humanity. If there would be betrayal, then the nation would fall, as Jeremiah said would happen, because of the low standards of individual morality among the people. Defeat and exile are a result. But the prophets always planted the seeds of hope. There'll be a new generation. They're going to come back to the land of Israel. The people can never be obliterated. The people of Israel can never disappear. The other nations might, but God has plans to work God's ways in history through the Jewish people. And every single prophet, Jeremiah, Amos, Hosea, Joel, Habakkuk, you name them, they all believe what is called, in the prophetic term, She'erit Yisrael. The remnant of Israel will always live, will always come back to the land. Jeremiah is the composer of Hatikvah. The word Hatikvah appears in his prophecies, as well as Ezekiel. And he predicted that he would, what he did was buy land near Jerusalem in Anatot in order to prove the fact of faith that the people would come back to the land one day. So it was warning and dire unfolding because of the people's behavior, but always a message of hope. What the prophets also did, it's in the Torah, it's kind of a debate among some of the scholarly work, but certainly the prophets put morality as the chief cause underpinning of our monotheism. We are not monotheists, we are ethical monotheists. Ayatollah Khomeini might be a monotheist, believes in God, but he's not an ethical monotheist. And that's what the prophets contributed to our understanding of God. God, not tied to morality and ethical behavior, righteousness, is not belief at all. Doesn't exist in the eyes of the prophets. The voice of God that matters. The voice of God is mightier than any power. And that becomes important in modern philosophy. I hope you all take my class because we're going to go through every major philosopher from Plato and Aristotle all the way down the line. And one of the major modern prophets, philosophers, is Frederick Nietzsche, who in his prophecy, looking at the end of the 19th century, said, the only thing that matters is might. Might overrules morality. That's why the Jewish people are pathetic, he said. Religion's pathetic, because only might can determine the future. That's the exact opposite of the prophets, who taught us that only morality can be the ultimate power of history and of the universe. Now, my question that I wrote a note here, who are the prophets today who are warning us about the future? I thought about that question. We need prophets. We need those who really call it as it is. Because where are we headed as a civilization? There are a lot of dire warnings out there. Who are the prophets in Israel? Who are the prophets in the United States today? We're getting fed up because we're not hearing clear vision of what is really going on. Deal with the problems that we have. We pretend as if everything's okay. Perhaps we need some prophets to really shake us up. Another thing the prophets contributed is what is called the double standard of the Jewish people. This comes from the prophet Amos, but all of them say this. You Jewish people are going to suffer more than any other group of people, or the same, let's say, even though they are barbarians and they kill people, and you are not mindful of the nuances of the Torah. You should know better because you have the Torah. This is called the double standard that we've been living with throughout our history. We judge ourselves by a completely different standard Maybe that's not fair, but I see it as a source of strength. We're always willing to judge ourselves very firmly, very strongly, in order to become a better people. The prophets believed in Yom Adonai, in a day that's coming, a day of God, in which there will be messianic deliverance for the people of Israel. Through the She'erit Israel, the remnant of Israel, we're living in those times today, in my view, the rebirth of the state of Israel. The prophets, like Jeremiah, gave us a message of doom, warning, but also of hope. Two sides of the same coin that we always need to be mindful of what's happening, but also mindful of our faith. Jeremiah lost faith in the people at his time, but he never lost faith in God and God's ultimate wishes for us. So I leave that with you. This is an unbelievable catch of literature that we need to read. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Amos, Yoel, Hosea, all of them, even the minor prophets. And I always wonder when I read these texts, who's giving us this message today? Who understands the deepest forces of history and morality that we need to confront before we're ravaged and destroyed? And by the way, when I read these prophecies, and I think what's happening in the world, as the prophets warn, there is no guarantee of any stability. There's no guarantee that nations remain forever. It's really clear and very important for us to always understand that. And that's why I think it's important to come, I hope you all will, at Tisha B'Av, which follows next Shabbat in the evening. Time to reflect and think about our past of prophecy and truth and where we're headed. So for that, I wish you all hope and vision and strength that comes from the prophets of Israel. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please rise as we begin the Musaf service. Mark Simon, there you are. We'll be leading the Musaf service beginning with the Chatzi Kaddish on page 184. We'll continue with the beginning of the Amidah through the Kedusha and a couple little surprises added to that. So Mark, begin.
Yiskadal v'yiskadash shemei Rabbo.
Amen.
Bi'alemo divrach Yerusei v'yamlich malchusei b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei l'chol beit Yisroel b'golal v'zman kori v'yimeru Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbo mivorach Le'olam le'omei omaya Yisporach v'yishtabach v'yispoar v'yisromam v'yisnasei v'yisadar v'yisale v'yisalal shemei dekudesha le'elam min kol birchasa v'shirasa
Tushbecha
Shavnechem Asa Damiran Bi'alema V'yimeru Amen.
Page 185.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elokei Avoteinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Hawel HaGavol HaGibor HaNorah El Elyon Gomel Chasodim Tovim V'Korei Hakol V'Zocher Hastei Avod U'Mevi Goel L'Bnei B'neihem L'man Shemo B'Yavo Melech Ozer Mefaked Moshiach Magin. Baruch atah Adonai, Magin Avraham, u'Moked Sarah. Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayei Metim atah, Rav Lehoshia, Morid atah, Mechalkel Hayim B'chesed, Mechayei Metim B'rachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim B'rofei Cholim U'matir HaKolim, Umtarim U'manatol Shenei Afar, Milchamocha Bal Gevuruto U'midom Melech, Melech Meimis Umchayei U'matzmiach Yeshua, V'neman Atolach Hayos Meitim, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayei Hameitim.
Amen. Kedusha, page 187. 187,
Naritzcha v'nakdishcha, Kisot Siach Sarfei Kodesh, Hamakdishim Shimcha b'Kodesh, Kakosu v'yad Nevi'echa, V'karav zel Zeviyamar, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzivos, Melech haaretz, Kivodo.
Kivodo Le'olam Shatav Sholim Mizela
Kivodo Malei, Malei Olam, Mishosav Shoalim Zelazeh, Aye Mikom, Mikom Kivodo, Kivodo Lumosam, Baruch Yomayru, Baruch Kavod Adonai Mimkomo Yifen Birachamim V'yachonam V'yachonam Am Yachadim Shemo Erev Avoker B'chol Yom Tamid Pamayim B'yavo Shema Omrim Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Eloheinu Hu Avinu Hu Malkeinu Hu Moshienu Vehu Yashmienu Birachavav Yashmienu Birachamam Shenit 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 Shenit, 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 Li'anei Kochai, V'hu, Yashmienu, Berachamav. Shenit, 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 Li'anei Kochai, Li'ot Lachem Le'Elohim.
Ani Adonai Elohechem.
Uv'derei kodshecha kosuv le'mor.
Yimlo Elohai Fiyom. Ledor vador, Alleluia.
Ledor vador.
Ledor vador.
Ledor vador.
Ledor vador.
Ledor vador magid God lecha. Ledor vador.
Ledor vador.
Ledor vador. Ledor vador nagid God lecha. Ulenetzach nitzachim lekroshas hadish enim checha v'simchateinu mipinu yamushos li'olam va'ed. Ledor vador. Ledor vador. Ledor vador nagid God lecha. Ledor vador. Ledor vador. Ledor vador nagid God lecha. Ki deshach natish v'shivcha Eloheinu mipinu lo yamush lo am va'en. Ki melech ki deshach natish v'shivcha Eloheinu mipinu lo yamush lo olam va'en. Ki el melech karo v'karo shatah. Baruch atah Adonai,
Baruch Shemo,
Hoel HaKadosh.
Amen. We continue with the remainder of the Midah from page 188a through the end on page 192. There'll be a couple of surprises along the way. Ti kanta Shabbat or ti kopernoteha. L'akoriv gam kazma v'shavim shetan leinu b'sim v'le'asenu tila b'gvuleinu et korbanoteihem Yom HaShabbat shenei kavasi b'nei shalom Yismechu.
Yismechu v'malachusecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Yismechu v'malachusecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Amikadashei Shevi, Kulam Yisbiyu v'Yishagu v'Yisragu, Mituvecha v'Ashivi v'Tzisabo v'Kidashto, Chemdat Yomin Atakoraso, Zecher L'Masei v'Reishis, Yismechu b'malachusecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu ritzei v'mnuchoseinu Kodshenu b'mitzvosecha v'sein Elkeinu b'torasecha Sabei Aleinu mitzuvecha v'samchenu b'shuatecha v'taher libeinu lioftecha beyemes v'hanchileinu Adonai Eloheinu b'yavo ratzon Shabbos kodshecha v'nuchu v'Yisrael mikadshei shemecha Baruch atah Adonai mikadesh hashabbat.
Sameach nefesh mishatecha.
Yiskara v'yiskara shemei Rabba.
Amen.
V'yamod divrach Yerusei v'yamlich malchusei. B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayedecha Beit Yisrael ba'gola v'zman kori v'yimeru.
Amen. Yehi shmei Rabba mevorach.
Li'olam li'omei amaya. Yisparach. Yisparach v'yishtabach v'yispoar v'yishamam v'yisnaseh v'yisadar v'yisaleh v'yisalal shemei kodesha li'elah min kol birchasa v'shirasa tush b'chasa v'nechamasa da'amiram b'yama v'yimeru
Amen.
Tiskabal tzilosan u'vosan dechol Yisrael kadam avahon dev'shmaya v'yimeru Yehi shalom arava min shamaya v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimeru Oseh shalom b'mramav u'yaseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimeru
Amen. In Kelohenu, page 204.
Ein Keloheinu, ein Kadonenu, ein Kimalkeinu, ein Kimoshienu, Micheloheinu, Michadonenu, Michimalkeinu, Michemoshienu. No del Eloheinu, no del Adonenu, no del Malkeinu, no del Moshienu. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. Atah Shektiru Avoteinu Lifanecha Et Ketoras Hasamim En Keloheinu En Kadonenu En Kimalkeinu En Kimoshienu
Aleinu, page 205.
Aleinu l'shabeach v'adon hakol, l'atosh k'nula liotzer b'reishit, shelo atanu ki goyei aratzos, v'lo samanu k'mishpechot ha'adama, shelo sam chalkeinu kahem, v'gor aleinu k'chol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוצר אורץ ומושג מקרא בשמיים ממעל ושכינה שזו Bigoye miromim, hu Eloheinu einot, emes malkeinu efesu laso, hakosu b'toraso, yadotayom, Shezei Elohim. Ki Adonai hu Elohim, v'shamayim mimal, v'yaretz me'ayitachon, einod.
Okay, then with the Adonai Eloheinu, l'rod mirav. After the separation, people table. Hilachati hakol berish v'Beth
Kakatu b'toratecha, Adonai yimloch li'olam v'oed. V'nemar v'hoya Adonai l'melech al haaretz. Bayom ahu, yeh Adonai echad. U'shemo.
Please be seated. We note the passing this week. It's been a busy week, sad one. We lost two members of our congregation. David Narens passed away. To Ludmila and family, our consolation, condolences. And we also lost this week Betty Lozier, beloved wife of Julius Lozier, and we wish Julius and his family nothing but comfort and solace as well. We also remember the art sites this week of Irvin Beichuk, Harry Chaffetz, Bertha S. Formas, Burton L. Bogdan, Harvey Green, Sherilyn Costello, Myrna Levine, Reba Laurie, Abraham Dembowski, Rose Butansky Kemeny, Doris Paver, Brad Robeck, Joseph B. Schimmel, Gertie Smiga, Jacob Phillips, Ruth Schwartz, Harry Stein, Ruth Steinbeck, Carol Rosenfeld, Robert Rosenfeld, Milton Victor Rubino, Max Goldstein, and Bob Pines, also all of blessed memory. So those in mourning, here and at home, we rise to remember our loved ones with deepest and abiding love, with the words of the Kaddish, page 207, together. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah. Yalmad yivrach irutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechon v'yomechon. V'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael. Bagalau v'zman kari v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'lam u'le'maya. Yiparach v'yishtabach. V'yipar v'yitromam v'yitnasei. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitzalal. Shmei de Kudusha Brichu. Le'ela min kol bechata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, gam yiram bi'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shmaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. May God bless us with peace. With our announcements today, Marsha will be coming forward. Well, the middle, I think that's wherever you're comfortable.
I want to thank everybody who participated in our service today. Without you, we would not have a service. And I want to congratulate those who had aliyahs. Again, it wouldn't be the service and wouldn't be Temple Beth Sholom without all of your participation. I also want to welcome all of our young people. They single-handedly have decreased the average age of the people here.
It's a miracle. Wonderful.
Soon we'll be a young synagogue again with their help.
We're getting, that's one of my goals. We're going to get there. We're going to start bringing in families.
I want to congratulate the rabbi. He is now a member of the Israel Bond Rabbinical Advisory Council. Not only is it an honor to you, but it is an honor to our synagogue that you have been appointed. I want to congratulate the service family for everything that was brought out today, and recognize that Melissa had a great honor to be on Good Morning America. They also sponsored our Bima baskets along with Selma and Barry Abshas in honor of their 61st birthday, Irving Pullmutter in memory of his brother Ralph, and the only other, we really don't have any programs today, but I do want to encourage everybody to join a committee. What makes our synagogue great is all of your participation, your voices, and Lauren would love to meet with you and suggest an appropriate committee for you to be part of. The ONIC today is Bagels and Lox, so when we conclude, please go outside and have something to munch before you go on with your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Marsha. Let's hurry. We have Bagels and Lox waiting for us. Oh, Bagels, I'm sorry. No Lox today. We'll get there one of these days. Mark, I hope this is the first of many times. What a pleasure. What a beautiful voice you have. Our hidden talents continue to just absolutely amaze me. Adon Olam, page 211, followed by our Kiddush.
Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nimra Li'esh Nasa V'chefzo Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra V'yacharei Kiflos HaKol Levado Yimloch Nora V'hu Haya V'hu Ove V'hu Yiyeh B'tifara V'hu Echad V'yein Sheni L'hashilo L'hachmira B'li Reishis B'li Tachlit B'lo Ha'oz B'ham Yisra B'hu Eli B'hai Goali V'tzur Chevli B'yetz Sahara B'hu Nisi Umanos Li Minat Kosi B'yom Ekra B'yado Afiru B'yei Ishtan B'ya'ira
could have anybody under the age of 20 to come forward here. You know what I'm talking about? Come on, everybody rushes up. Come on, you guys. You have to have some credibility here. Okay, but we do have a bunch of youngsters under 20. Minors, by definition. Come on up, kids. I don't have... Oh, you're still here. Nice to see you, Joss. Good to see. Wow, we really have a lot of kids here. Where are the Melissa kids? Servants. Are you tired? See, poor you look tired. She's what? We'll just begin. Why? She's fine. Okay, I guess they're not coming? Well, we'd love to have you. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש על כן ברכנה יום השבת ויקדשהו צברי ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן. Hi guys, this is a trend for the future. Madam President, please note. B'shutchem, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lecha min haaretz. Share with me. Hey Josh, good to see you again. Take some home. We'll have more inside. Thanks, Sebastian. Before our kids, you want some challah here? Take a little challah. Good for you. I'll have to get some grape. You're leaving pretty soon, aren't you? Last night. Okay. Will you come back and give your grandmother a big hug? Really good to see you. I hope you enjoyed yourself. That we should encourage them to have their time. You know, dreaming about having so many kids and we'll need somebody to watch them. Yes. Wouldn't that'd be a nice problem to have. Shabbat Shalom. Ooh, careful. Did I hit you? Okay. Thank you for the good show. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Marilyn.
You're down the street from me on
Yeah, that's right. I know. That's right.
So I'm getting a couple of people over for drinks Monday at 5 o'clock. And I'd love it if you could make it over.
I don't know what I'm doing.